so bad, but I'm sure I have some suggestions as to whose voices you should use.
Okay,
so I was trying to focus on the schema for the ontology, and then the three categories that I was, and this is really where I could use some feedback. The three categories that I was focusing on in terms of for behavior is that would make up what we consider behavior would be people or user behavior, asset behavior, or an asset does not mean a server necessarily only. It could be anything physical that's a device. And then the last thing would be software or application behavior. And so the user behavior or people behavior would be focused primarily on, let me see where my notes are here. Sorry. On basically psychological patterns. And then the second one, the asset behavior, and these I identified as feedback loops. And then the second would be asset behavior, which would be primarily protocols that assets are restricted by. So the normal protocols that they follow in communicating, in terms of inputs and outputs. Application behavior, I was focused on the software, which would have subgroups based on, I'm trying to get feedback on, am I overcomplicating this? Am I trying to be too exhaustive?
My thought is we're not sure yet. I think it's a good starting point. And as we get something, kind of a draft to work with, we can start circulating through the group and getting feedback. I mean, like,
that's good.
I'm still thinking, like, based on what you just said, I'm still personally thinking through it, because my first cognitive bias goes to looking at merging software and hardware under assets, but I don't know if that could be a very bad idea.
No, that's fair. There are no bad ideas. They're only bad conclusions, right? So I think that, I think that's a good suggestion. So let me make a note and include that in this outline so that I can add it as a question mark.
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of feedback I'm looking for. There's nothing's off limits. I just want to understand where I have a tendency to be over to try to, I hate redaction. And so I try to be overly exhaustive, too comprehensive.
It's all good. In fact, we might, as people are getting signed up, I think, we might do a little bit more formal start to the meeting, and we still have a block on the agenda to kind of do a deep dive on this. And I think we might bring it back up for the whole group, if that's okay with you, Daryl.
Yeah, of course it is. Yes. And what I can do is then Friday, I can send this outline out from the feedback here. And then we can try to refine the outline so that I know how to fill in blanks.
Excellent.
Like I can go get, like, if we decide that we want to keep these three categories, then talk about interoperability, like how the categories depend on each other for input outputs. Because a lot of this is already defined. It's just grabbing the information and putting it together, and then deciding how do we simplify it in a meaningful way for practitioners.
Makes sense.
And then looking out at the marketplace and determining, is there a solution, or are there solutions that could accomplish this?
Yeah. Cool. So that said, Ladrina, do you? I've been hogging up conversation for a minute. As the co-chair, do you want to do the welcome, or would you like me to?
Yeah, go ahead, Charlie. I was just taking some notes on the conversation so far. So
So welcome everybody to the Indicator Behavior Working Group. For those that don't know me, my name is Charlie Frick. I'm a security researcher at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and I'm currently serving as one of the co-chairs for the working group, along with Ladrina Chern from Cyber Reason. If you want to say anything, Ladrina, real quick, I'm happy to be quiet and let you talk too.
Yeah, absolutely. Pleased to be here furthering our conversation about IOBs. And for those who are new, you might already be hearing that our definition of what an indicator of behavior is one of the things that we're looking forward to discussing here. And any questions, hopefully you are on either the IOB mailing list or in the Oasis Slack. And if either of those is foreign because you just got here from a LinkedIn invite, we'll be sure to provide that information towards the end of the session so we can keep the conversation going.
And I think we see a few new members. So I thought it might be good, we'll try and keep it real brief, but very quick round of introductions. I'll start with some of the repeat attendees. And so Dee, our Oasis Zoom team, if you want to give a second just to introduce yourself to the crowd again.
Sure. Hi, I'm Dee Schur. I work for Oasis and I support the Open Cybersecurity Alliance open project within Oasis. And the IOB work group is one subgroup of that major group. So I support the work of the IOB work group as well.
Excellent. Daryl, put you up next.
Yeah, I'm Daryl Diebold. I'm with IBM Security, and I'm an executive threat advisor, and I'm a part of the OCA work group for IOB and helping to come out with an outline for the definition for what an indicator of behavior is.
Excellent. Jason Kierstead, how are you doing, sir?
Hey there, Charlie. Great to
Howdy.
meet you. Are we doing introductions or?
Yeah, just
yeah,
super brief. We're just trying. We have a couple new
Jason
members.
Kierstead, CTO of Threat Management, IBM Security, and co-chair of the OCA.
Thank you, sir. Marlon.
Hi, my name is Marvin Taylor. I'm representing DHS CISA. I'm glad to be here. Involved in SIX and taxi as well.
Glad to have you, sir. Hey, Kurt Korolenko.
Yeah, Kurt Karolenko. I work alongside Charlie at JHU APL, exploring behavior and detection objects. Yeah.
And we have a couple new members, so I'm going to do my best, just reading off the Zoom. But looks like we have John Cleary from Equinix.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the intro there. Dee from Oasis actually reached out to me on LinkedIn and we connected, and I saw the link and I had this spare hour. I'm based in Dublin, Ireland here. I work as a global solutions architect for Equinix. So here to listen and learn really as much as I can.
Wonderful. Well, we're happy to have you here. And I believe is it Mateus?
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Mateusz. I'm a PhD research fellow from University of Oslo, working with standardization within cyber threat intelligence. I'm also involved in some Oasis projects. Happy to be here and want to catch up and listen to what you have.
Wonderful, sir.
Yes, thanks.
Well, so glad to have everybody on board. And I'd like to take a moment just to call out for those that are watching the chat window. One of the best ways to keep abreast of what's happening with the IOB working group is the Slack channel. So under Oasis Zoom team /D has posted a link to the Slack channel as well as to the discussion mailing list for the IOB working group. Those two will keep you informed of the new developments for the working group. And if you have questions or ideas you wish to share, the Slack is an excellent option to cover that. And going back to our agenda, thank you, Ladrina, for reposting that. At our last meeting, Jason, great, we're very grateful. Jason kind of facilitated a meeting between some of my research team and MITRE Ingenuity to discuss some of the technical work that I've been sharing over the last few meetings on our work on adversary behavior bundles represented in sticks format. So that went very well. Just also share that MITRE also had me provide a summary briefing to a joint cyber analytic working group for US Cyber Command, and they had some good discussion there. More folks interested in this idea. Haven't had many reach back yet for next steps, but I've invited all of them to the working groups, and hopefully we will get some more participation. Jason, I don't know. I know you were on for a part of the meeting. I don't know if there were any topics you wanted to make sure were covered from that session, except me thanking you for making it happen.
No, I don't have anything else. And thank you, Charlie. Actually, thank you for taking the time to go and build that connection. I said into that group, like I think one of the best things that we can do at the OCA, and I think aligns most with our mission, is this idea of bridge building and being kind of the facilitator, because there's so much work going on in cybersecurity in all these different venues. And we have a number of folks here who are kind of straddling a lot of those activities. So building these kinds of connections, this is what I really try to do. So I'm glad it worked out. And I hope that as they start off on their project there, that there can be a lot more dialogue between the different groups. So.
Agreed. All righty. Then, Adriana, are you fine if I just keep charging through the agenda?
Yeah, if I could add one more point on
Please.
yeah, just another kudos and thank you, Jason, for making the meeting happen. A little bit of context for what's going forward is I understand it's still an open question how we're going to share information back and forth between us and Ingenuity. Certainly happy to be the people who build the bridge and hold the conversation, but only because a lot of the Ingenuity work is TLP Amber. So the idea of knowing who's getting the information, where we, as you can see from Dee's recording our session, which will be posted to YouTube, just maybe a question that's still open about information sharing, if I recall correctly. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think so. I think there's still some stuff to figure out there. And Steve Luke from MITRE, he did say and leave the door open that they have the ability in the project charters to basically specify, we will share XYZ with this group. So that, that might be a path that we go down. Don't know yet. But I'm glad at least the conversation started, so at least they're aware of what's happening over here.
And not to derail too far from the agenda, but just to share, we do have a reference implementation revision 0 JSON object for our research on adversary behavior representation, and a document to kind of serve as a technical guide to accompany that. I am working through our public release process, both with the laboratory and with our sponsors at CISA. And hopefully over the next few weeks, we'll be able to get that through the public release gateways and be able to share that with the group. And at that point, we might, Jason, we might even look for, I don't know if we want to use the GitHub repo to store documents, but it's an option if we want. The JSON, I think, could fit there without any problem, but that's something we could talk about. We'd be willing, if once it's publicly released, of course, we'd be glad to share it with, with this group and host it wherever is the best place to host it.
I think, yeah, as long as, so And we've been having some of these conversations actually up at the PGB around, how are we, because there's these questions about, this venue here as a working group versus the other things in OCA are projects, and what are the deltas between those. And we're trying to keep this group very open to the public. So I think, Charlie, as long as when things get published to the OCA GitHub, you have to digitally sign the CLA. And as long as you're comfortable with that and able to post that, I think that's fine. So we actually have an action item that came out of the last PGB meeting to create a repo for this working group. So a new repo for the IOB working group, and we're going to create a couple of new repos under the OCA org that don't exist yet. So that would be the perfect home for this, because GitHub's getting a little bit messy.
Yeah.
we're trying to organize it. So right now, like, all of the meeting minutes for all of the different meetings are all in the documentation folder, and we're trying to organize it so that there'll be like an IOB repo, and there'll be the architecture repo, the zero trust repo, like everything will be separate, right?
Yeah.
So stay tuned on that. Just haven't gotten we got the approval to do it last week, but we just haven't gone through the mechanics of doing it. Hopefully get that done before the end of the week here.
Wonderful. Yeah, because right now the little technical guide is going to be a PDF. Converting it to Markdown is not out of my skill set, but might take a little while to get everything in. So ideally would like to be able to just post the document with JSON.
Yeah, the format, you can put PDFs on GitHub. The format
yeah.
doesn't matter.
Oh yeah, I mean, done it before. I just was more, if you had some requirements on how you like your GitHub, we'll try to conform as best as we can. Alrighty, but enough on that. Kind of the next topic for discussion, and having John and Mateusz here, I'm already happy to see some new names, but we thought it might be good to spend a few minutes just discussing some strategies on how we increase visibility and membership of the group. I think Dee's been doing a fantastic job promoting this on LinkedIn, and Jason's been doing, a very fantastic job keeping the OCA writ large informed of what's going on here. But I wasn't sure if other folks had ideas of routes you think we should be following to bring more members of the community into these meetings to increase awareness. Excuse me. I'm open to any ideas if anybody has some to share.
Just my 2 cents. I do think that some of this, I hope, right, is going to come out of your artifacts, Charlie. So like once you've gotten those approved and they're ready to publish, having something to talk about and show, it'll go a very long way, I think. So I do, I'm always Mr. Optimist, but I'm hopeful that that'll be somewhat of a catalyst too.
That makes sense, and I agree, because I often find it's a lot, at least I find it a lot easier to have something to review and critique in a constructive way. I don't mean anything negative there, but I think it's always easy to have something to start with and then foster ideas and discussion on other ways, better ways to do it, which is kind of one of our big motivating factors for why we want to share our work as soon as possible, because we love what we're doing, but we sure would like to have some other insights and input to make sure that we haven't gone off the deep end here. So, and let's see, I think there was a comment in the chat. Is there an outreach strategy to connect into the other forums and conferences or Oasis events? And we haven't brought that up yet. Now, Dee, I think we're quite a bit away from the next Borderless Cyber, correct? Is that normally October?
Right, right. So there is a plug fest that Duncan is organizing and coordinating with a bunch of different things. I don't have that right at my fingertips, but I'll look in a minute. Just in terms of Oasis events, events have been really tough on everybody right now. We do have some overarching things that are going on with the OCA at RSA and possibly Black Hat. But as soon as I get anything nailed down on those, I will let all the work groups know about that.
Thank you, Dee.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Sorry, everybody. I was having a little bit of work done in my office, so I just had to take a second to be on mute there, but I'm back. And also, said, Dee's contact information, or you can send it to the Slack or the message list. If you have some ideas of other forums where we should be promoting this, we're all for it and are glad to incorporate anybody's suggestions. I know I'm personally, whenever I'm briefing our technical work across my sponsor base, I'm referencing the working group and inviting them to join, and I'll be glad to plug it for any conference talks that my team is doing on this topic. And then Jason brought up a good question for Marlon on whether or not at some of the technical committees that perhaps we could make a plug about the working group for those that might be interested.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I know we are trying to look across some of the other working groups, well, some of the other TCs, and see what the alignments are. This is definitely something that came to mind with OCA and the IOB, especially since it's in the charter, and just looking for next steps. But I do think that's something to coordinate amongst the chairs and the leadership team of each one, but definitely looking forward to creating more of those bridges. As Jason mentioned, there's a lot of things that we have overlapping across the cybersecurity realm within Oasis. So definitely trying to bridge some of those organizations and teams so we can be collaborative and shared focuses.
And
So
oh, go ahead, Jason. Sorry.
I was just going to say what we could do, Charlie, is I'm not sure if you're members of the CTITC, but what we could do is I could email Trey and Rob and introduce you and ask if at the next meeting, because usually at the CTITC they run monthly meetings, and usually there's a little bit of time reserved for community corner, community discussion. And we could see if, you could give like a 5-minute overview of the work here on that call.
I'd be happy to, and I'll also volunteer Ladrina for it as well.
Yeah, let's do that. And I see Dee mentioned Jane as well. Yeah, I mean, let's reach out to Jane and the TC leadership.
Thank you.
Good idea.
And like I said, not to put you too much on the spot, Dee, but for borderless cyber, like call for papers or anything, that's probably going to be summertime, I'm guessing. Or am I way off and it's already happened?
No, it has not happened, and I think that's probably the right time frame. Yeah, we've been so focused on RSA and Black Hat.
Yeah.
I'm putting the information on the SBOM Plug Fest in the chat. That might be something that's interesting too. But believe me, as soon as we get anything going on on borderless, we'll let you know.
Okay, thank you. Because I think we definitely would want to look into supporting that. Just given the nature of everything.
Exactly. And borderless last year was virtually, it was the best. I mean, just in terms of the number of folks that were involved in the content, and it was fantastic. You probably remember, right? Did you do a presentation?
No, I did the one
Bef-
right before COVID.
Right, okay, okay.
So I think I did not, I think I did Borderless Cyber 19.
Okay, but they're still great. So I will let you guys know, let you know when the submission time period is.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dee. And thank you, Dee, for I think it's worth reviewing what strategies we've used so far besides Slack, besides the OC mailing list. And I know Dee's been great about LinkedIn. I was going to ask, does Oasis have a Twitter account? Can we, and if so, can we distribute meeting notices through there?
I'm sorry, Ladrina, I had a hard time hearing your question.
She was asking if Oasis manages a Twitter account, because
Oh, yeah.
we've
Yeah,
had
we
really
did.
good sharing on LinkedIn, but Twitter might be another good place to hit a good chunk of the community.
Well, OCA has its own Twitter account, and you know what? I normally do that, but I don't think I did a tweet this time. So good, thank you. Yeah, I try and do all the channels, but that's a
Great.
good idea. I will
Does
do that
everyone
next
here follow the OCA Twitter account? Aha, that's the real question.
There
Yep.
you go.
Charlie logs into Twitter right now to see.
Yep. As I was searching for my combinations of alphabet soup, and Dee or Charlie, please do holler if my microphone fades out. I've got a couple settings here I'm usually switching between. And I also, while we're kind of at the bottom of the hour, I know, Jason, you have to drop in a moment. I'll say, welcome, Paula. Good to see you. And we're just in the middle of discussing strategies for membership and outreach. If you have any ideas, feel free to jump in.
Great, thank you. I work with Charlie, so he and I, are usually in discussions on these things, so it's all good.
Yep. And thank you, Jason, again. And as of 5 seconds ago, I'm now following the OCA on my personal Twitter as well as my professional one. So, yay. Thank you for putting the link in the chat, Dee. Alrighty. I think that brings us to a good time point to kind of reintroduce Daryl Diebold here and Chal Jason. So at last month's meeting, we had a point of discussion come up on while we've been set up this working group to discuss cyber indicators of behavior and help define what that means. It's taken us a few meetings as we got the core group together and have established our charter. We wanted to start diving a little deeper into the technical scope and content for the working group. And we were wondering, and we came up as how do we define an indicator of behavior as opposed to an indicator of attack, which has been a term being used by quite a few members in the threat intel community. And so Daryl offered to start with an outline so we could begin having that discussion. And don't want to make you repeat yourself too much, Daryl, but I think as we've had some people join in from when we started, it might be good just to give a quick recap and we can dive a little deeper into talking about your outline, sir.
Yeah, Charlie, yeah, thank you. The outline is just in terms of roughing it, I don't want to be too exhaustive on the call, but looking at at behavior across the span of technical dependencies. So try to create categories and primarily focus on user behavior, which would focus on, all of these would be focused on pattern analysis. But some of them are restricted because of the requirements, for instance, around hardware assets of different types, follow specific protocols, right? And then software as well. So I created 3 categories, which would be, and I view these as feedback loops that have some interdependencies between the other 2 categories. So user loops or user behavior, focused primarily on the psychological patterns, but we're looking at the physical patterns as they occur, and then asset behavior loops, which focuses on the protocols that they're restricted by, and then application or software behavior loops that focuses first on obviously the software by type, and then subsequently the the programming language could be. I'm reluctant to go all the way down to programming language in terms of granularity, but I was mentioning earlier, I tend to be overly exhaustive, so this could take me days, weeks, months, years if I keep focusing on it. So I wanted to try and get feedback on if those categories make sense, and then any suggestions on how I might avoid being overly exhaustive in trying to come up with a definition.
Okay. So I know I mentioned the idea about, and I still need to think more on it, but yeah, the idea that software may be a type of asset, and we might be kind of a bifurcated kind of ontology between people and things, but not,
Yeah, and
yeah,
I
not,
made note of that. That was a good suggestion. And
Yeah.
again, like you were saying earlier, these are not definitive. We're just trying to come up with ideas and feedback so that we can create the proper categories to then go and identify what the appropriate signal intelligence is that's been captured today or isn't, and then the codependencies on inputs and outputs so that we can see the relationships.
and Ladrina posted a summary in the chat. See if she captured that properly from what you were intending to say, Daryl.
Oh, the chat window, let me see, sorry, Charlie.
Yeah, sorry, that's okay.
Yeah, that's a fair summary. Yeah, all of these would be feedback loops. That would be the one correction. And then there'd be interdependency between certain feedback loops based on behavior or activity. For instance, a user that's the user is going to vary by type, right? So there's natural patterns that we're going to see. For instance, an admin that's accessing ESX hosts in a virtual environment is going to have a different pattern
Very much.
of activity from a standard user who's a business user who's accessing an application. And defining those patterns could be helpful, I think, in terms of what an indicator really is. Because there's normal behavior, and then within normal behavior, there can also be suspicious patterns based on different aspects like time, frequency, location.
Yeah, and I definitely say the work that we've been focusing on has mostly been on those bottom two categories of looking at kind of observed asset behavior of a compromised network during certain classes of threat cases. So
Right.
So I like this. I already like this a lot, Daryl, because it's broader than what we here at the lab have been bringing to the table, which was our whole point of wanting to collaborate here. So I like it.
And I can give you guys, to the extent you want to know, I can give you a look into my brain. You can say no now or forever.
Oh, please feel free.
Yeah, so that if you wanted to look in my brain about 10 years ago, and even before that, but probably more focused. 10 years ago, I was talking to some distinguished engineers within IBM, and then also from other peers that are engineers, and we were talking about business process workflow and business models, institutional models inherently follow. They have a natural output, right? How do they deliver value? What is it? What is their mission? Or I don't know what language that everybody here prefers to use, but what is their mission? And different business models have inherent dependencies on technology in their functional areas based on their model. And if you can identify workflow, you can get baseline activity. And I had suggested to someone, why doesn't somebody reverse engineer a worm? I know that sounds like a dirty word to some people, depending on what kind of hat you wear, but reverse engineer a worm that could pervade a system and then passively capture activity, baseline behavior, and then build a process map around that, right? The technology exists, it's existed for decades to do that, that supports those businesses underneath. And so that's not necessarily, but that's where my thinking was, because as I was trying to give advice to somebody who was in the federal space, is the approach that a lot of standards-based organizations take excludes, I don't think intentionally, but the inherent necessity of different business models leveraging technology specifically for their outcome. And that's how you start to think about baselining their behavior and then looking for anything that deviates from it. That's a very high level picture of what's going on has been going on in my brain, but it gives you some idea of where does this come from. We tend to focus from a technology up path, but human activity inside of the business model is what drives all of that, the technical dependencies underneath it. So I guess I'm trying to look at this from the top down and bottom up both. But we don't have forever to define this. So I just, any feedback would be helpful. Otherwise, I'll be drinking a lot more coffee.
Daryl, I'll just thank you for sharing that. I think I'm going to bring it back to the top line item in this discussion, which is, so we're talking about indicators of attack versus indicators of behavior. By definition, by doing this exercise, also finding indicators of behavior as well. But when we're thinking attack versus behavior, one thing I'm hearing you say is by baselining normal, we have all kinds of different indicators of behavior, including known good use cases. We have normal business operations. We have our admins doing all of their, PowerShell administering, that sort of thing. And one thing that I'm starting to think about indicators of attack versus indicators of behavior is that attack is a subset of behavior. And really, with IOBs, we're considering both the malicious behavior. This is what's helping, we're creating different models to help identify adversaries. That's our goal. But it's really also including maybe might be considered false positives or normal behavior. And I'm seeing IOB as that greater circle, IOA, indicators of attack, as that subset. So just one thing I heard.
But no, I actually drew that out. That's exactly right, because the primary reason is if you look at fundamentally what practitioners, analysts, and others are doing, and then to a larger extent what developers of technology are not doing, is the practitioners in security are struggling with the sheer amount of volume of noise. And then sifting through that noise, if you look at natural human biology, the average attention span of a human being is less than 9 seconds. A goldfish is 9 seconds, right? And so they can't rationalize the amount of intelligence, or not intelligence, of feedback they're getting. They can't rationalize it. It just sounds like a haze. And so the tendency is to apply natural bias, which it means that they're going to apply bias in the areas where they have some level of competency and exposure and experience. And unfortunately, for example, some of the more recent attacks from nation state actors or organized groups is they're applying some approaches, just by way of example, like MISIM, MISIM, automated software models. They're applying those models, the very same things that businesses are using to create, to develop features faster for the business. They're applying those in attacks, and they're patternless. in some way, they have a pattern, but they seem patternless to current sensing methods. They don't provide a signature, right? And they can be fileless. So how do you identify those? Well, you need to have some kind of a baseline. What's a normal state? To really distinguish what those are, like you said, an indicator of attack. If all we're ever doing is looking for suspicious activity, then what's the metric? What is the ruler that we're applying that says this isn't an inch or this isn't a yard? And if we don't have that first, then trying to identify something that is suspicious, as evidenced by the last 20 years, is problematic. So I agree with you. I think IOA should go underneath IOB.
Yes.
And maybe we're creating different subcategories under IOB, like indicator of normal, of baseline behavior. And that's what systems today are, they're not doing, right? They're just looking for something that's suspicious versus flagging things and removing noise by comparing it to a baseline activity. Does that make sense? Because I think
with you there.
Yeah.
And, I'm also happy to tractors as well.
Yeah, I think that people are just doing battlefield triage right now. You look,
Yes.
And that, and I don't think that the business or even the people, everyone else that's involved in the technology landscape that's been supporting the business understands the disparity, like the amount of noise that they're producing.
Yeah, Daryl, just to jump in here, and it's probably an ignorant comment, and forgive me if it is, because it's my first session here and I'm still trying to get up to speed really as to the content, but coming from a commercial background where I've worked on, effectively a sales end for UEBA solutions, and they never effectively were deployed, and they exactly that, they just added to the noise. Very, very difficult. I mean, as a question, are we looking at the taxonomy and the ontology that commercial off-the-shelf products are using, like Vectra or Darktrace or Logarithm? I mean, there's a lot of that baseline already done, I would have thought, no?
Yeah, that's a good point. So depending on the like, for instance, as you're referring to Darktrace, depending on the ML models that they follow, what they tend to do is they build out those capabilities or those technologies is they tend to do bottom up or somewhere from the middle bottom up. And what they don't really do a great job of, and I think this is a problematic part about deployment, is that they're trying to match all of this up to technologies that are human dependent. In other words, there's not a lot of non-concurrent technologies that are employed in every enterprise or industry or whatever you want to refer to it as. Those non-concurrent technologies create a lot of that noise, and they're non-concurrent for different reasons. I don't know that we want to be exhaustive in explaining that, but they're non-concurrent for different reasons. That, exactly to your point, it's like when they're building those features and they're sending them out to the market, they're really taking the path of least resistance rather than trying to define the problem more clearly.
Yeah, no, fair enough, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that would strike me as, what would I look for if it was an indicator of attack versus an indicator of behavior? I mean, that there's very sophisticated, I'm sure everybody knows, I'm just thinking of the very sophisticated authentication solutions out there. Again, without mentioning vendors, but I've kind of fallen back on it. The likes of call sign and these solutions whereby how quickly you type your password, how you hold your phone, all this kind of analytics can really add into a relatively high, assumption of I am that person. So that authentication capability that we have around the technology in terms of biometrics as well as everything else, including voice, I would have thought would make the indicators of attack category easier than indicators of behavior.
That's a good point. So I actually wrote down what you said around sophistication, and then authentication. But the biggest thing that jumped out at me when you said that was vectors, like looking at where activity coincides to try and identify what would be a manageable, a deployable method for detection of indicator of baseline would be looking at those cross sections, those intersections where human activity with the technology. So looking at where those are would be really important.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of anti-fraud solutions out there that, as I said, they don't just assume, geolocation, time, what time you're accessing, what asset, where you're doing it from, all the geolocation stuff we see. It's for you typically on the cloud service providers, Azure, more or less, their whole identity engine. They take it a step further, and they obviously can include biometrics. But interestingly, it's literally how consistently you use your phone, how hard you punch your password into the actual keyboard goes into a repeatable pattern that can identify you as you. So I suppose that's the easy bit, really, is the authentication, how we can be sure that person is who they're supposed to be. In terms of the behavior thereafter, I'll be sure.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
Excellent.
Yeah, that was very helpful.
So yeah, I think if, we give you some time to take all that feedback, and as you get your thoughts kind of written down, we'll be able to share those with the group and hopefully have a second round of discussion during the next meeting, I think.
Yeah, I'll produce an outline for you before end of day Friday, and then send it to Dee. Then she can publish it out to the team, and then just be gracious, because I'm going to try to make it as non-exhaustive as possible. I'll try to put more pictures than words.
Thank you. All right. Okay, Ladrina, I think that gives us the last 10 minutes for general open discussion. I don't know if there are any topics you wanted to lead off with, or if there's anything that anybody else would discuss, but I tried to not keep hogging the conversation. It's hard for me. It's against my nature.
Yep, thank you, Charlie. I'll leave the floor open here for a minute, and I had on my mind to just talk about our next date, but I'll close with that when we're about done.
Okay. So, kind of open to the floor, and then I'll reserve one plug before Ladrina's plug at closing. But if anybody has any topics they'd like, or questions they'd like to ask, or other topics, kind of an open forum right now if anybody wishes to speak.
Well, I just like to say thanks for the reaching out. Dee. It's great to be involved in the group, and in terms of increasing the awareness or the membership of the group, I'd be more than happy to. As when I get further into it and understand exactly the group dynamics and purpose and stuff, so I'd be more than happy to do that.
Thank you, John. And not to kind of keep plugging it too much, but as soon as once we have the public release for some of our research and Daryl's write-up, I think we'll start having more documents that you can share with colleagues to kind of help open the discussion. And I think Jason was right that will gain a lot of interest.
Yeah, I think it's very timely. I mean, UEBA from the industry commercial perspective, and that's where my background really is almost a dirty concept. At this point, it's been such a spectacular failure in terms of just creating noise. The end user, which is always typically some security manager who has to use these typical tools, logging in and letting a C-level board member access to something at 2 a.m. because they're trying to get an RFP response done. That's your typical scenario of it. So, trying to avoid that, I think that the industry would welcome it for sure.
Excellent. Anybody else have anything they wish to discuss?
Who's going to win the Super Bowl? Does anybody have any?
Cincinnati,
I'm with you. I hope they do.
just because LA, the Rams have won before. So, let's give one to the Bengals.
Boomer's waiting in the sidelines.
Yes, he is.
I guess I'm for the Rams because my daughter's friend plays for the Rams. They went to high school, so kind of cheer for the
Good
local
reason.
boy.
That's a good reason.
They have the odds in their favor for sure.
Yeah, he's the right guard. Is that right? The guy that protects the quarterback, 79 or something. I don't know. I think that's what they call him.
For our European friends, apologize for American football. It's our big game this weekend.
Oh no, not at all. I worked in the Caribbean and I've watched many Super Bowls in my time, and I've stayed up here as well to watch a few. Some more memorable than others. So yeah, I look forward to it. I'll probably catch the highlights.
Cool. Just trying to always remember the global community aspect to the working group. So we'll try not to fall too much into too much Americanese. And I like to make sure that we distinguish when we talk about, when folks do wish to talk about federal partners, that we should reference which country. As I know, we also have some Canadian representation on here as well. That I know when I was earlier talking about United States Cyber Command, and I think someone else was mentioning some U.S. federal partnership. But just throwing that out there to remember, for all of us to remember that we are looking for an international community through this effort, because it's going to take all of us. And
some.
All right, and I see Dee's posting the next time block. My mini plug before I hand to Ladrina was just saying, ideally, we should have our data released by the March meeting. And for those that hadn't seen some of the earlier talks, a lot of that is some research on what we've been doing here at the laboratory on representing this in the structured threat information exchange, or STIX 2.1 format. So just so you have an idea of where my team's coming from, we're looking at some things in that type of JSON format to represent some behaviors. And I'll be quiet on there and hand the floor to you, Ladrina.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, and it's a good transition. I think we'll be talking about that at our March meeting, which Dee has mentioned in the chat. March 8th, same time, same place. If you want to block out that time generally on your calendars, we're planning on the second Tuesday of each month. So I think we'll close it there with the official recording. And
All right,
thank
well,
you all so much for
thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.